So this model is of the Bahidaj harvest, which is a traditional practice that we have as Autumn of going out and collecting the cactus fruit from the saguaro, but we also collected fruit from other cactus as well. So what inspired me to do this model was actually I saw this picture from the Arizona Historical Society where I saw this woman out there with her kids collecting from this saguaro that the middle actually from the picture looked like it had been cut off. But she was out there collecting this fruit, and I thought it was a really cool view into, this woman with an apron, and she has kind of modern dress, and the kids are dressed like any other kids that I grew up with on the reservation. And I just thought it was a cool photo. So I wanted to use that as the inspiration for creating this model. But then also, what originally started out as just the woman and just the cactus and just her harvesting by herself, when I went out to a community meeting in Blackwater, District 1 of Gila River, I received from some of the community members there that they wanted to see children represented in these models that I was creating. And so one of the things that I did when I got back from that meeting was I reached out to the designer and asked about trying to create some of these models that you see, the little kids around the basket. And again, part of that was just wanted to have these kids taking part in this activity and showing this as kind of a family unit. So the story behind the cactus fruit harvest as well would be we would go out basically every year, right before the monsoons typically, usually like May, sometimes early June. And we would go around and we would, as a community, gather these cactus fruit. And we bring them back. We'd make jellies, jams. The seeds would be ground up and they would be used to make different food as well. But a portion of the harvest, as told through a couple of history books, a portion of the harvest would be put to the side, and that would be used to make kind of cactus wine. And that cactus wine would be used for kind of the rain calling ceremony that we had as a community. And this was a very large celebration and gathering where folks would come together. They would drink the wine, and then they would be, as it's described in some of the books that I put into the research, it's described as calling down the rain or pulling down the rain. And I just thought this was such a cool story, but also just a beautiful illustration of some of these ceremonies that we maintain still to this day, but also that have kind of reverberated throughout history. So my thoughts on the actual model itself. This was actually one of the easier ones that we had modeled. Didn't really have any issues with it. The detail of it is really beautiful. The only struggle that I really had with it was with the cactus and the base of the model. If you have this base when you print it out, both were just so big because proportionately the saguaro cactus to a human being, like saguaro cactuses are just so huge. And it really wasn't until I started this model and was starting to print these out that it really like weighed on me just how huge these cactus are. And so, I see them driving around, and I would see them when I was a kid, but not really up close. I'd never gone harvesting when I was a kid. And so I'd never really been up close to one of these cactus before. And so going up to it as an adult now with like just this idea and understanding of the proportion was just so interesting of like, these are so big. And it's funny because doing some of the research when I was thinking about doing this model, I did this research and I found these old journals from folks who were coming through Arizona, just explorers, or there were some that were from some of the early priests who came into Arizona from in Mexico. But it was really interesting to me how folks described the cactus as trees. And they would say these giant trees, these giant thorny trees, because they didn't really have the word for cactus for some of these folks. And it was just interesting because I had never really thought about, the cactus is our main form of greenery. But if you had never seen something like that, if you're, primarily from the East Coast, or you've come from a climate that's not specifically a desert climate, maybe you had never seen a cactus before. And so it just added this whole new layer that I thought was so fascinating about saguaro cactus. But anyway, back to the modeling. Yeah, that was the biggest struggle, was just these cactus, especially trying to get them out in resin. They they accumulate so much resin because they're so big compared to the other pieces of this model, that they were really expensive. So one of the things that I did was I actually figured out, and I printed these out in FDM, or kind of plastic material, and that worked really well, mainly so that it didn't cost me an arm and a leg to print these out for folks. But other than that, all of these other models have printed wonderfully. The designs were great. The inspiration that I had from all of these, again, the woman and the cactus, that was an easy part of that historical society photo that were very clear. On the two children, because their faces are shadowed in the original picture that I used, I actually took photos that came from Frank Russell's The Pima Indians, the book. And in that book, he has some profile photos of just people from the community. So children, boys, girls, men, and women, and just kind of has them in different dress and different positions so that you can kind of see their faces better. Because one of the other things that I found out specifically with this model, because when we were modeling these children, my modeler reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm not really sure what face do you want on these folks, because I don't have a clear photo of them." And even when you have a front-facing photo, when you're doing this modeling on a 3D plane, you really have to have some depth of what the face looks like from different angles. So for the most part, my designer has been awesome and has kind of worked with me, because a lot of the photos that I'm able to find are just 2D, one side only. But for these kids, it was really lucky because I was able to find those photos from Frank Russell's The Pima Indians to give a reference of somebody that he was able to put into and imbue into these children and be able to have this come to life, which I think was a really great collaboration. And I really appreciate District 1, Blackwater, putting this out, that they really wanted to see children represented in this project.